This podcast is for general information only. It is not intended as a substitute for general healthcare services. If you have medical conditions, you need to see your doctor. Use of this information is at the user's own risk. Welcome to FitRx with Dr. Greg Dennis. Join me as we challenge the standard sick model of healthcare. This is your source for everything health, wellness, prevention, fitness, biohacking, and more. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of FitRx. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Dennis. So if you are back with us and listened to the last episode, I started a series called The 7 Pillars of Optimal Health. So these are kind of the 7 pillars that I have come up with. There's different versions of this, but in my experience, I've been doing this for a little while now, of the things that are going to make you optimally healthy. So last week we talked about sleep. If you have not listened to that one, I discussed how I believe it is really the foundation of all of these pillars. So I would encourage you to go back and listen to that episode. So today, pillar number 2, we're going to talk about nutrition. Nutrition is probably the least agreed upon areas in health and longevity. You can find convincing people telling you to go vegan, eat Mediterranean, eat carnivore, eat keto, that meat causes cancer, and then others saying meat is the healthiest food you can eat. Fat is bad, fat is good, carbohydrates are killing us, whole grains should be a major part of our diet. You need to fast, or you need to eat 6 times a day. So if you're confused about nutrition, I don't blame you. So I've been studying this nutrition as it pertains to longevity for years, as well as changes to my own kind of nutritional regimen. And I would say my thinking has changed over the years, and that's okay. And I'll talk about that. Science evolves, and my clinical experience changes, and just how we interpret things. So today we're going to talk about kind of where I've landed personally, what I recommend most healthy people do as far as nutrition, why protein is so important, should we eat carbohydrates, should we not, where do fats fit in, why I still do sometimes use low-carb diets therapeutically. I'll talk briefly about vegan, keto, carnivore diets, and why I think we're making nutrition much more complicated than it needs to be. So, first principle I want to discuss is calories do matter. This is probably one way my thinking has changed over the years. You know, we were always taught that in school, and then I was to a point where I didn't really think calories matter as long as what you were ingesting were good calories. But I do think calories matter. You know, there was a time when I focused much more on food quality, on hormones, and all those things matter. But energy balance also matters. So if you are chronically consuming more energy than you're using, you are likely to gain weight. If you're carrying excess body fat, particularly visceral fat, that affects metabolic health. Don't turn this into a calorie as a calorie, because that's too simplistic. So if we compare 500 calories of steak, vegetables, potatoes versus 500 calories of cookies, technically same energy, but physiologically and behaviorally, different protein, different fiber, different micronutrients, different satiety, different effect on subsequent food intake. That's why it's so easy to overconsume ultra-processed foods. You can eat 1,000 calories of chips, cookies, pizza, ice cream without feeling particularly full, but try eating 1,000 calories of chicken breast. Very different experience. So calories, or the foods, do matter, but so does the overall amount of calories. So again, if you are constantly in a calorie excess, you're much more likely to gain weight than if you are chronically in a calorie deficit. Calorie restriction is one of the more consistent longevity interventions in animal research. In humans, we can't necessarily say definitively that eating fewer calories will make someone live longer, but we definitely know that it helps in healthy body composition. It improves metabolic health, insulin sensitivity, which is clearly important. So I don't think we should walk around hungry your entire life in the name of longevity, but I also do think we have to be careful with having calorie excess consistently. Let's talk about my number one nutrition priority, and that is protein. When I look at someone's diet, one of the first things I want to know is, where's your protein? So why is that? Well, protein provides amino acids necessary for muscle, recovery, enzymes, hormone signaling, connective tissue, many other physiologic functions. And if you listen to me at all, you know how much I prioritize muscle, or I talk about muscle as it pertains to longevity. Muscle is the organ of longevity. It improves our metabolic health as we age. It also decreases risk for things like osteoporosis. And if we are able to maintain our metabolic health, then we can significantly reduce our risk for about everything, cardiovascular disease, cancer, etc. And muscle is a huge component of that. Unfortunately, as we age, muscle mass tends to decline, strength declines, recovery becomes harder, and sarcopenia, which is just losing muscle as we age, becomes a major problem. But if we can maintain muscle, we're going to decrease risk of falls, fractures, and just it's going to help our ability to remain active later in life. And that's why I talk so much about resistance training, really all ages of life, but specifically as we get older. But to maintain muscle, and certainly to gain muscle, we have to have protein. So it's one of the key ingredients for muscle maintenance. How much protein do we need? Well, that varies. Probably depends on your age, your body size, your activity, your goals, any medical conditions you may have. But for most people, I would build every meal around a quality protein source. So examples of protein: eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, chicken, turkey, beef, fish, seafood, things like that. So for many people, I would say try to get in the neighborhood of between 25 to 40 grams of protein per meal is a useful target. The other nice thing about protein is it tends to be the most filling. So if you prioritize protein first, it becomes easier to control those total calories like we were just talking about. So as I talk about protein and I give examples of protein, I usually talk about red meat. So let's talk about red meat, because some people think that red meat is going to kill you. There are debates about it because red meat contains saturated fat. So they say, well, it's going to raise your LDL cholesterol. It's going to increase your cardiovascular risk and increase risk of colon cancer. But we need to distinguish, and I think this is important. So a lot of times when people talk about meat, they group a steak in the same category as a hot dog, or ground beef in the same category as highly processed deli meats. And they're not the same. These are apples and oranges. If you are including unprocessed meats into your diet, then that's a concern. And that could very likely increase your risk, for disease. But if you are eating good quality meat, especially as it pertains to red meat, I would recommend, if you can afford it, get your beef from a farmer, local farmer, and not necessarily from the store. And this is going to be your best option as it pertains to red meat. So prioritize good quality protein. So let's talk about fat. I think fat is healthy. Certainly fat is not the villain like we thought it was for many, many years. It seems like the pendulum kind of swung in the different direction. Years ago, especially in the 80s, of course, everything was fat-free, and we saw a significant rise in obesity during that time. And so we know that that is not the way to go. But now, with the popularity of keto, people are putting butter in their coffee, MCT oil and everything, huge amounts of added fat. That's not necessarily wrong, but I also don't think we need to go to extremes to just add fat. Healthy fats absolutely belong in the diet. So things like olive oil, avocados, nuts, eggs, fatty fish, they're great for you. But keep in mind, fats contain 9 calories per gram versus protein and carbohydrates contain only 4 calories per gram. So, as we talked about our overall amount of calories, it is much easier to be in a calorie excess when we are adding a bunch of fats. If you're eating a handful of nuts, great. If you sit down with a bag and eat 800 calories of nuts just because nuts are healthy, it's a different situation because now we have to start thinking about the calories. So let's talk about carbohydrates. There was a time, especially when I started kind of getting into more longevity and health and wellness, that I was all about the low-carb movement. And certainly it has its place, which I'll talk about. But if we're looking for the ideal, quote, diet, I don't know if that necessarily has to be low carb. I still probably eat fewer carbs than the average American, but I no longer believe that a metabolically healthy, physically active person like myself needs to be afraid of carbohydrates. So when people say carbs, they're putting radically different foods into one category. For instance, Coke, candy, cookies, highly refined snacks. Those are carbohydrates, as are blueberries, an apple, sweet potato, vegetables. So these shouldn't be discussed as though they're metabolically identical foods simply because they're all carbohydrates. For an active, metabolically healthy person, whole food carbohydrates can provide energy, they can replenish glycogen, they can support exercise performance, they can provide fiber, they can provide micronutrients and phytonutrients. I often recommend carbohydrates around exercise because you're going to use that fuel, and especially immediately after exercise, carbohydrates could bump up your insulin a little bit and promote nutrients going into your muscles after a hard workout, which is needed. So I'm still relatively low carb, again, compared to the standard American diet, but I do eat some carbohydrates. So I like eating berries. I'll eat fruit. I eat sweet potatoes. I eat vegetables. And I don't fear carbohydrates anymore simply because they're carbohydrates. So I think the real common denominator here, as we talk about just kind of how to eat and nutrition in general, is to eat real food. And this is really kind of the heart of the episode. And this is where I feel like nutrition and diets kind of get overcomplicated. So my basic rule is this: eat foods that look reasonably close to what they originally were, such as chicken, beef, turkey, fish, eggs, vegetables, berries, potatoes, beans, minimally processed grains, if tolerated, fats like olive oil, avocado, nuts, fatty fish. Compare that to processed foods, especially highly processed foods like Coke, candy, cookies, chips, crackers, cereals, fast food. That, in my opinion, is really how we should be eating. Eat real whole foods, minimize processed food, especially the highly processed foods. So kind of my grocery store rule is that most all the foods that you should get are around the perimeter because that's where the whole foods are. So all of your meats, your dairy, your fruits and vegetables are all on the outside of the store. Now, that's not a hard, fast rule, but if you think about it, that's going to be mostly true. And certainly there's spices and herbs and there's nuts that you'll find in the inner aisles, but really not much more than that are going to be healthy. So I'll also say this. You don't have to eat perfectly. I occasionally eat dessert. I'll eat sweets, and I go out and eat restaurant foods. I'm not metabolically unhealthy because I occasionally eat dessert. It's what you do most of the time. And this is where exercise comes in. Exercise is the great equalizer, and I'm going to talk about that in another episode. But if you are exercising regularly and you get to the point where you are metabolically healthy, then certainly you can afford to sometimes eat sweets, and you can afford to eat out, and you can afford other things. If you are not there yet, then you may have to be a little more strict until you get there. Which brings me to the point of when I still do recommend low carb or keto. And I certainly do. If someone is obese, if someone has significantly elevated triglycerides, if they have fatty liver disease, if they have type 2 diabetes, I'm not going to necessarily give that person the exact same nutrition advice that I would give a lean, insulin-sensitive athlete. Certainly, low carb can be a tool, and sometimes even a ketogenic diet can be a significant tool. If we are after appetite control, weight loss, glucose improvement, insulin sensitivity, trying to get off medication, then certainly a ketogenic diet can help that. People with type 2 diabetes, this is still my go-to because it can help them get off medication, become insulin sensitive, hopefully try to get off insulin if they're on insulin, lose a lot of weight. So certainly a low carb, therapeutic low carb, or ketogenic diet still has its place. Now, I will say if you're listening to this, especially if you are a diabetic and on medication, don't just do this on your own. You need a medical professional to help walk you through this and help you get off medication if that's the goal. So, please don't try to do that by yourself. I will say, keto is a tool. It's not a religion, as some people will make it out to be, but it can be a useful tool. So let's talk about other diets, such as vegan and vegetarian diets. Can someone eat vegetarian or vegan and be healthy? Yeah, I guess so. In my mind, they would be miserable people, but I guess you can be healthy. But do I believe it's the optimal diet for most people? No, absolutely not. So it requires more deliberate attention to adequate protein, B12, iron, zinc, omega-3s, calcium, iodine, vitamin D. And for somebody who preaches muscle preservation as a major tool for longevity, getting adequate high-quality protein, that's the key. High-quality protein is simply easier with animal foods. Now, vegetarian diets can be high in plants. They're high in fiber. They may be low in ultra-processed foods, if done correctly. Therefore, they could have some favorable cardiometabolic outcomes. Certainly, I would say something like that is better than eating a diet that's full of highly processed foods. So, again, could have its place, but I do not feel it is the optimal diet. So what about carnivore, where you eat nothing but meat? I surprisingly get asked this a lot, and I've had podcasts about this. I've interviewed several doctors and other people. So if you are interested in this, you can go back and listen to those. So in my experience over the years, what I would say about the carnivore diet is, one, it is highly restrictive. It's obvious. It basically eliminates everything in the standard American diet, that you don't want. So that's a good thing. So there's not going to be donuts and cereal and chips and cookies. You're going to prioritize protein. So you're going to get plenty of protein. So therefore you're going to feel more satiated. But if you're removing things, such as some things that may be healthy, like berries, or, other certain types of fiber, then I don't know that it's necessarily optimal. I don't think carnivore is inherently disastrous, but I think for most people it's just highly restrictive. It's difficult to maintain. The long-term evidence is limited, and I will say for most people it is unnecessary. Now, when I get people to come in and they want to try the carnivore diet, and especially if they're wanting to do kind of a metabolic reset and, try to heal their gut, and they want to do carnivore for a time, that's fine. Like, I don't think you're going to hurt yourself by doing it. But again, I just don't think it's necessary. Sometimes an elimination diet is good, again, just to heal your gut and kind of do a reset. I don't know that you have to go to that extreme of a carnivore diet, but again, some people have done that. I will say, I have had some people who have autoimmune disease who have been on a carnivore diet fairly long term and have done pretty well from an autoimmune standpoint. Now, there's very limited evidence in that, and it's certainly not a evidence-based treatment for autoimmune disease. But I have had some people that have found some benefit in that. So people want to know what I eat. And I talked about how, kind of my nutritional philosophy has changed a little. And I would say, pretty fit for my age. And I have pretty low body fat for my age. Certainly, I consider myself very metabolically healthy. But I do exercise, I maintain muscle, I do all of those things. So people want to know what I eat. So typical day for me as far as nutrition, I usually start out with a small bowl of Greek yogurt with just a few blueberries and maybe just a little bit of honey, because I buy the unflavored organic Greek yogurt. Now, I don't always do that, because I work out in the morning, so sometimes I will work out fasting. But if I'm going to eat something in the morning, that's usually what it is. If I don't eat that before a workout, I'm usually doing kind of a homemade pre-workout mix, which includes an electrolyte mix, essential amino acids, my creatine, things like that. And then I work out. Almost immediately after a workout, I make a protein shake with whey protein. Now, I do prefer the clean whey protein. Either I like the brands Naked or Raw. I usually will throw a banana in there to, get a little bit of carbohydrates after my workout. I will use either grass-fed organic milk or sometimes almond milk. And sometimes I'll experiment and put other things in the shake, but those are the main things. For lunch, I'm usually eating leftovers from the dinner the night before. I tend to cook fairly healthy dinners, and so those are probably going to be, it could be anything. Grilled chicken, fish, some vegetables, basically just whatever I had the night before. So, for dinner, then, again, I'm eating, chicken, fish, beef, and usually those contain some vegetables and some herbs and spices, and sometimes I use a crock pot, sometimes I don't. So I do try to get a variety, and then whatever I cook, that's usually what I'm eating for lunch the next day. So snacks that I like are, I mentioned the Greek yogurt. Even if I do start my day off with a little bit of Greek yogurt, I'll usually have another Greek yogurt as soon as I get home from work before supper. And again, usually I'll mix some blueberries in that, maybe just a little bit of honey to give it some flavor. Sometimes I will throw some walnuts in there. Other snacks that I like, again, I do like nuts. I like pistachios, a handful of pistachios. Nuts are very good for you. Again, they are fat, so they're going to be high calories, per gram. But as long as you're not eating the whole bag, that's good. And, I do try to cut all my calories off by 7 p.m. so that I get a 3-hour window before going to bed. I do think that's very important. I talked about that a little bit in the sleep episode last time, that I just think we get better quality sleep, and we need that time of a little bit of fasting for the insulin sensitivity and things like that. So I do try to make a hard cutoff, so I certainly don't like snacking right before I go to bed. So my general formula is protein first, then some vegetables. Try to prioritize whole foods and healthy fats. So that diet doesn't really have a name. I mean, it's just, I guess if you wanted to call it paleo, but it's probably not even that strict. It's just a whole, eating real whole foods. And like I mentioned earlier, I'll have sweets occasionally, healthy person. And so I don't feel like we have to restrict ourselves. So as we talked about last time, I'm talking about these 7 pillars, and nutrition doesn't exist independently. When I was talking about sleep deprivation increases hunger, and then it makes food choices harder. If we're going to talk about exercise later, I talked about protein and how a resistance trainer helps preserve muscle, and carbohydrates can help fuel the muscles and help with that. Hormones, emotional health, relational health, spiritual health. I talked about this last time of how all of these are intertwined. So there's not one of these that are just independent that you can do and expect to have optimal health. If you've listened to this podcast, usually when I interview a guest, I ask them to give us one health tip that would make us healthier today. And since I'm talking, I'm not going to ask that question. But the last time on the sleep, I did give you a little bit of homework to try for a week, specifically for sleep. And so I'm going to do the same thing today as it pertains to nutrition. So this is going to be my 7-day real food challenge. So for 1 week, what I'd like for you to try is get protein at every meal. So just eat that first. Ask, where's my protein? So that's number 1. Number 2, try to eat mostly single ingredient, minimally processed foods. Number 3, eliminate sugary drinks. If you drink Dr. Pepper, I don't care if it's diet, Coke, whatever, they're terrible for you. If you do anything else in your diet, just get rid of those. I mean, my gosh, I've seen people make leaps and bounds in their health and their weight by just eliminating crap like that. So get rid of those. You can have water, coffee, tea, etc., but eliminate sugary drinks. Number 4, eat vegetables and or a little bit of fruit every day. Number 5, don't fear healthy fats, but don't deliberately add excessive fat. Number 6, if you're metabolically healthy, big asterisk there, don't be afraid of quality carbohydrates. Number 7, allow yourself some flexibility. Don't turn this into another extreme diet, because most people just won't follow those. If you've been listening to this and you're waiting for me to tell you whether you should be keto or eat Mediterranean or carnivore, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I just don't think your diet needs a name. I think you need to prioritize protein, eat real minimally processed foods, eat some plants, eat some fats. Adjust your carbohydrates to your metabolic health. Certainly don't chronically overeat. maintain muscle, maintain a healthy body composition, and don't let perfect become the enemy of good. So if I could change one thing about the American diet, it wouldn't be making everybody vegan, keto, carnivore. It would be getting people to eat real whole food again. So thank you for joining us, and hope you found this helpful. I'm going to continue this series on the 7 pillars of optimal health, and next time we will talk about probably my favorite, which is movement and strength, and why exercise isn't just something you do to lose weight. It's one of the most powerful tools we have for maintaining health, function, and independence as we age. So we will see you then and talk to you next time. Thank you for listening to FitRx. I invite you to share this with friends and family. If you would like to contact me, you can visit our website at fitrxwellnessok.com, or you can email me at drgreg@fitrxwellnessok.com.